It started off like something out of a bad joke, the kind of story you'd share with your buddies while you're knocking back beers. Hey, did you hear the one about the wife who hooked up with a taxi driver? Sounds ridiculous, right? Like something from a tacky adult film or a low-budget TV show. But here's the thing. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't some funny little story you laugh off. It was real, and it was happening to me. Let me back up for a minute. I'm Mark, just a regular guy in my 30s. I've got a decent gig in tech. I'm an account manager. Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills. I'm no saint, but I never thought I'd be sitting here, writing about all of this. I guess, in a way, I'm hoping that somehow putting it into words will help me sort through the mess. Or maybe it'll be a warning for someone else who's going through something similar. I've been married to Emily for 6 years. Together for 8. We were good. At least I thought we were. No big blowouts, no screaming matches. I always thought that was a sign of a healthy relationship. But maybe that was my first mistake, thinking that just because we weren't fighting, everything was fine. As for Emily, well, she's gorgeous. Everyone says so when we go out. People can't help but look at her. And sometimes I catch a few stares that lasted a little too long. At first, it gave me this ego boost. After all, I was the guy who got to go home with her, right? But after a while, it started feeling off, like there was something I wasn't seeing. We have one car, not because we can't afford another, but because Emily doesn't like driving. She says it stresses her out, and I get that. So I end up being the one to drive her everywhere. Grocery runs, work events, out with her friends, you name it. It was fine for the most part, until it wasn't. When I couldn't take her somewhere, she'd just grab a taxi. Honestly, she seemed to prefer it, like she didn't want to bother me. Looking back, I should have noticed how often she was using cabs. That brings us to the day everything started to fall apart. I had a business meeting downtown. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another client. But it was important enough that I had to be there on time. I grabbed my things, headed out the door, and walked a few blocks to where we parked the car. You know how city parking is a pain. No parking right in front of your place. It's a hassle, but we're used to it. Except when I got to the car, it wouldn't start. I tried for a solid 10 minutes. I'm no car expert, so I just sat there, turning the key, praying it would start. No luck. I opened the hood, stared at the engine like I knew what I was doing. Spoiler alert, I didn't. By then, I was already sweating through my shirt. I had no choice but to call a tow truck and get the car towed to the shop. Now I was really running late. There was no way I was going to make it downtown on foot or by bus. So, I did what I had to do. I called a taxi. And that, my friend, was the beginning of the worst ride of my life. The driver was one of those guys who can't shut up. You know the type. The ones who think every passenger is their captive audience. He had this greasy comb-over, and his shirt was half unbuttoned. Didn't even care to look professional. He grinned at me in the rearview mirror the second I got in, like he was waiting for the chance to chat. "Busy day?" he asked, glancing at me through the mirror. I gave him a short answer, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But of course, he didn't. "Man, you wouldn't believe the stuff I hear driving people around," he said, his voice grating. "The stories make me wonder how people live with themselves sometimes." I barely responded, just staring out the window, trying to ignore him, but he kept going, oblivious to the fact that I was clearly not interested. "Actually, just the other day, I picked up this woman a few blocks from where I picked you up yesterday," he continued. "Pretty regular spot for her. She's a real looker, too." My gut twisted. That sick feeling from yesterday came rushing back, only this time it was worse. My jaw clenched, but I kept staring out the window, pretending to be absorbed in the scenery. But something made me listen. A few blocks from my place? It couldn't be Emily. It just couldn't. "She's a stunner, man," the driver said, totally oblivious to the tension in the air. I was actually hoping I'd see her again today. Maybe catch her around that same spot. You know how it is with regulars. I gritted my teeth. "Why?" I asked, my voice coming out tighter than I wanted. I wasn't even sure why I asked. Maybe I just needed to hear what he was going to say next. Some part of me didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. The driver chuckled like he was about to share some juicy tidbit of gossip. Oh man, it was like something out of a movie. One of those pornos or something. I picked her up one day, just a normal fare, dropped her off at her place. No big deal, right? I could feel the anger boiling inside me. But I stayed quiet, waiting for him to continue. So I tell her the fare, and she starts digging through her fancy purse. You know, one of those expensive-looking ones. She's digging and digging, and after a few minutes, she looks up and says she forgot her wallet. My stomach flipped. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, but I couldn't say a word. The driver kept talking, oblivious to how close I was to losing it. So I'm thinking, great, now I got to deal with this. I was about to give her my number, so she could call me and pay me later. People are usually good for it. But before I could even say anything, she leaned forward and said, "How about I do something instead?" That's when I almost lost it. The air inside that taxi thickened, almost suffocating me. My hands were so tight in my lap that my knuckles felt like they might break. I couldn't take my eyes off the back of the driver's seat, trying to piece together what he was saying. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some twisted coincidence, a sick joke, something I could shake off. But the way he spoke, the way he painted the picture of her, I couldn't ignore it. Yeah, I was stunned, like who wouldn't be? Who the hell offers that as a way to settle a cab fare? The driver let out a nasty, satisfied chuckle. But then she got serious, man. Like she actually meant it. And she was hot. I'm talking real hot. So I thought, why the hell not, right? My throat tightened, and I could feel my stomach turn over. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud I thought he might hear it. He continued, "She was really impressive. It was one of the best experiences of my life." His voice got darker, more smug. And then, get this, she asked if I want to fuck her afterward. Like it was no big deal. I wanted to lash out, but I kept myself in check, barely holding it together. What? The question slipped out before I could stop it. What was her name? The driver shrugged, like it was no big deal. Oh man, I didn't care about names. Didn't ask. Didn't seem important. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about Emily. Maybe it was some other woman who made a terrible decision. Some random wife in the world who got herself caught up in the same mess. But deep down, I knew I had to know. I couldn't let it go. The driver must have sensed my hesitation, because that's when he dropped the bombshell. Wait, actually, I think I've got a picture of her, he said, grinning like he was showing off a trophy. For the memories. He reached into the glove compartment, pulled out his phone, and started flicking through it. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want this to be real. But when he turned the screen toward me, I couldn't look away. There she was, my wife, Emily, sitting in the back of his cab, flashing a smile that made my blood run cold. Her hair was messy, her cheeks flushed with color. And there, in her lap, was that damn purse, the one I bought her for her birthday. My stomach dropped. There was no doubt. It was her. I froze. My brain shut down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. My whole world shattered in that single moment. The driver didn't notice any of it. He kept talking, still laughing like this was just some funny story to him. But I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could see was that picture of her. All I could feel was rage, the betrayal like a cold fist in my gut. Without thinking, I launched myself forward. My fist hit his face with a sickening thud before I even realized I was moving. The crack of my knuckles against his jaw rang out, the only thing that made sense in that instant. The driver yelped, his phone flying from his hand and slamming into the dashboard. I didn't say a word. I grabbed the cash, threw it on the seat, and shoved the door open. My legs were shaky, my head spinning. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion, but I couldn't stop. I stumbled out of the cab, slammed the door, and stood there for a second, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. My mind was a whirlwind, caught in a storm of rage and heartbreak. Emily, my wife, had done this, and I had no idea what to do next. The business meeting that followed was a blur, but honestly, I couldn't care less. How could I? After everything that had just unfolded, work didn't matter. Clients, contracts, nothing was on my mind. I barely even made it into the conference room. I sat through the presentation like a zombie, and I couldn't focus on a single word. Every time I tried, all I could see was Emily, my wife, smiling in that cab, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. My head was throbbing, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. I could tell the clients noticed something was off. I saw the way they exchanged looks, probably wondering why the usually sharp, put-together guy was suddenly a shell of himself. He didn't cut it. I fumbled through my notes, gave some half-assed answers to their questions, but honestly, I was gone. My mind had left the building long before the meeting ended. I knew I had blown it. The deal was dead in the water, but in that moment, I didn't care. Nothing mattered. I walked out of that building like a man in a daze, my thoughts spinning wildly. What the hell had just happened? How had I gone from a normal, stable life to becoming that guy? The one whose wife cheated on him with a fucking taxi driver. And not just cheated. No. She degraded herself. Offered blowjobs for a cab ride like she was some character in a cheap porno. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, all of it churned inside me, and I didn't know what to do with it. But slowly, that anger began to twist into something darker, something colder. I wanted to make her feel what I was feeling. I wanted to hurt her. I wasn't going to be the pitiful, broken husband that everyone felt sorry for. No, I was going to make her pay. She wasn't going to get away with this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing in circles. I replayed every moment, every kiss, every argument like they were flashing on a screen in front of me. All those little pieces of our life together, the smiles, the I love yous, the fights that seemed so insignificant at the time. It all started to feel like a lie. It felt like everything we built, everything I thought was real, was just some illusion I bought into. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I couldn't stop it. At some point, I got up and walked to the living room, my mind racing. I paced back and forth, my thoughts spiraling. Revenge. It was all I could think about. How could I make her feel what I was feeling? I couldn't just let this go. I wouldn't. Then it hit me. Emily was obsessed with her image. She cared way too much about how others saw her. Her friends, her colleagues, everyone. She wanted to be the perfect wife. The one with the beautiful, charming husband. That was her whole world. Her whole identity. And I was going to destroy it. The first thing I did was file for divorce. No warning. No explanation. Cold and calculated. I wasn't about to give her a chance to explain herself, to cry and beg for forgiveness. I wasn't going to let her have any satisfaction in thinking that there was hope. I wanted her blindsided, just like I had been. I wanted her to wake up one day and realize that everything she took for granted was gone. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. I didn't tell her a thing. No hin, no kru. I just started laying the groundwork. I knew exactly how to hit her, how to make her feel like everything she thought was hers was slipping through her fingers. I'd take the house, the savings, everything we built together. She wanted to screw up our marriage? Fine. I'd make sure she paid for it. But it wasn't just about taking things. No, I wanted to ruin her reputation too. I started thinking about how I could expose her. The picture. The taxi driver. I needed that picture. If I could get my hands on it, I could show the world exactly what she was. I could destroy the image she'd worked so hard to build. All her friends, all her colleagues who thought she was the perfect woman, they'd see the truth. And she'd be humiliated. Just like she humiliated me. As I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the divorce details, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. I was finally taking control. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I watched the lawyers scribble notes, outlining the steps we'd take. Everything was so clinical, so businesslike. But I didn't care. This was war. When I finally told Emily, she had no idea what was coming. She thought everything was fine. She came home from work, talking about her day, asking about dinner plans, completely unaware that her life was about to implode. I stopped her right there. Emily, I said, my voice steady. We need to talk. She looked at me confused, but there was no guilt on her face, no shame. She didn't know what was coming. I handed her the divorce papers without saying another word. Her face went white. What is this? She stammered. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice cold. I know what you've been doing. She froze. Her eyes went wide, and I could see the panic creeping in. Mark, wait, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I didn't even look at her. I couldn't. The anger inside me was too much. Don't play dumb, Emily, I said, my voice low and sharp. I know about the taxi driver. About what you did. Her face crumbled, and she reached out for me, her voice cracking. No, Mark, it's not what you think. I cut her off, my patience gone. Save it, I snapped. I don't care what you have to say. I've already made up my mind. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, holding the divorce papers, her whole world unraveling in front of her. She thought she could get away with it. She thought she could cheat, lie, and everything would just go back to normal. But she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Revenge became my fuel. I had always thought of myself as calm, rational. But after what Emily had done, something inside me snapped. That nice, reasonable husband was gone, buried under layers of anger and betrayal. The only thing that made sense was making her pay. And I wasn't going to stop until I had torn everything she cared about to pieces. The divorce papers were just the beginning. Emily was in shock when I handed them to her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. But she didn't realize it yet. This was just the start of what was coming. I started small. You know that saying, revenge is a dish best served cold. Well, that's exactly how I played it. The first thing I did was drain our joint bank account. I knew how much she relied on it, the house, the bills. She barely looked at the finances, trusting me to take care of everything. So one morning, before she even realized what was happening, I transferred everything to my personal account. I cleaned it out completely. Emily didn't find out until she tried to use her card one day, and it got declined. That afternoon, I got a text from her, full of confusion, asking why her card wasn't working. I didn't respond. I just let her panic. That was the first taste of what was coming. Next, I started planting seeds of doubt among her friends. I made sure they knew the truth, bit by bit. Emily had always been obsessed with how others saw her. She lived for the image she had carefully constructed. This perfect, flawless wife with everything in order. It was her entire identity, her brand. She had worked tirelessly to maintain that pristine reputation, but I knew exactly where to strike. I started planting little seeds of doubt among her closest friends, just enough to get them wondering. I didn't give them too much at first, just enough to get them curious. Yeah, Emily and I are going through a rough patch, I'd say, making sure my voice was just vulnerable enough to sound believable. It's been tough, but I don't want to get into it. Of course, that only made them more intrigued. People love gossip, especially when it's about a perfect marriage falling apart. It wasn't long before rumors started circulating. Emily had spent years controlling how people saw her, but I was slowly unraveling that carefully constructed image, one conversation at a time. But that wasn't even the worst part of my plan. The real revenge, the part one couldn't stop obsessing over, was that damn picture. The one the taxi driver had taken of Emily, sitting there in the back seat, grinning like nothing was wrong. That photo tormented me, but I knew it was the key to tearing her down completely. I wasn't just going to divorce her and walk away, no. I was going to make her feel the same humiliation she'd inflicted on me. I tracked down the taxi driver. I'd gotten his name during that hellish ride, and it didn't take long to find out where he worked. He didn't care about Emily. To him, she was just another story, another conquest he could brag about. I didn't have to threaten him. He was happy to hand over the picture. "Do whatever you want with it, man," he said, smirking like he'd just given me a treasure. "She's your problem now." When I had that picture in my hands, I felt a cold rush of satisfaction. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I couldn't deny it felt right. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming control, about standing up for myself. I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing the consequences of her actions. I started with her work. Emily had always bragged about her career in marketing, how important reputation was in her industry. She built her whole career on being seen as the professional, the untouchable one. So I decided to send that picture to a few key people at her company, her boss, her HR department, a few colleagues she was close to. I didn't include any context. I didn't need to. The picture would say everything. I imagined the chaos it would cause. Her walking into work, completely unaware of what was coming, until she heard the whispers. Until her boss called her in for a meeting, the photo in hand. I could already picture the look on her face, the shame, the humiliation. It was exactly what she deserved. She'd turned me into a joke, humiliated me in ways I couldn't even put into words. Now it was her turn to feel that. But I didn't stop there. No, this was only the beginning. Emily had this little circle of friends, her social group, the dinner parties, the weekends away. She was always so proud of how perfect her life was. I made sure they saw the picture too. A few anonymous emails, some posts on social media. Nothing too obvious, just subtle enough that they'd start to see her for who she really was. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. I didn't hear from Emily directly for a while after the divorce papers and the bank account stunt, but I could feel the storm coming. I saw it in the frantic texts, the unanswered calls. She was in full panic mode, scrambling to figure out what was happening. It wasn't long before she showed up at my door. It was late, a week or so after I sent out that picture. I was sitting in the living room, drink in hand, when I heard the knock. I knew it was her before I even opened the door. And there she stood, on the porch, looking completely broken. Her eyes were red, her hair a mess, and there was a look of desperation on her face like she had nowhere else to turn. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice shaking. "We need to talk." I looked at her, the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but part of me felt oddly calm, almost detached. This was what I wanted, right? To see her like this, to watch her face the consequences of her actions. "Talk," I said, my voice flat as I leaned against the doorframe. "About what?" "About all of this." She gestured vaguely, tears starting to form in her eyes. "The divorce. The money. Mark, I don't understand why you're doing this. We can work this out." I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and cold. "Work this out? After everything you've done?" Her face crumpled, and she began to cry. "I made a mistake, okay? I'm sorry. But this is too much. Mark, why are you trying to ruin my life?" I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper, filled with all the rage I'd been holding in for so long. "Why am I ruining your life? You ruined mine. You made a fool out of me. You betrayed me, humiliated me, and now you think you can just walk away from this? You don't get to pretend like nothing happened. You don't get to escape." She sobbed harder, and for a split second, I almost felt something, a flicker of pity maybe, but it was gone just as quickly. This wasn't about sympathy. This was about justice, about making her face the consequences of what she had done to me. But then, I remembered that fucking picture. I remembered the way she had smiled in the back of that cab, like she had no regrets, no guilt for what she'd just done. That little smirk haunted me, and any trace of sympathy I might have had vanished. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice colder than ice. "You're going to feel what it's like to lose everything." With that, I slammed the door in her face, her sobs echoing in the night like a distant reminder of the wreck she'd made of my life. The divorce was a bloodbath, but it ended exactly how I planned. By the time it was all said and done, Emily's life was in shambles. I'm not even sure she'd recognize the woman who used to think she had it all together. The woman who once paraded around like she owned the world, who made everyone believe she had everything under control. Now she was just a shell, a shadow of the person she once was. I got the house, most of the savings, and half of her retirement. The court didn't care about the messy details of what had happened. They didn't care who cheated or who lied. To them, it was just paperwork. But for Emily, she cared, and everyone around her cared too. The fallout from that picture was worse than I could have ever imagined. After it spread through her work, the whispers turned into full-blown gossip. Her perfect reputation crumbled in the blink of an eye. She lost the respect of her colleagues, her boss, and anyone who had ever looked at her like she was untouchable. Sure, no one knew every dirty detail, but they didn't need to. The picture was enough. Emily had always been obsessed with her image, and I ripped that away from her. That was the real victory. The house, the money, that was just the surface. It was her pride, her reputation, that I wanted to destroy. And I did. Her friends? They all turned on her too. People loved to watch a train wreck, and Emily became the show everyone wanted a front row seat to. The same people who used to fawn over her at parties, the ones she bragged to about her perfect life, they all backed away slowly at first, and then all at once. No one wanted to be associated with the mess she'd made. It wasn't just the affair. It was the scandal, the humiliation. She became a cautionary tale, a joke, a topic of whispered conversations during wine nights. I knew her well enough to understand that this was worse for her than anything I could have done physically. She couldn't handle being the outcast, the one everyone pitted or laughed at behind her back. As for me, surprisingly, people were mostly on my side. When word started getting out about the divorce, I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I let the picture do the talking. It told the whole story without me having to lift a finger. Friends, colleagues, they all reached out offering their support, telling me how sorry they were that I had to go through something like this. Even the ones who had been close to Emily didn't know what to say to her anymore. She was toxic. People distanced themselves, and I watched her world crumble in real time. But as satisfying as the revenge was, something shifted after the divorce was final. Maybe it was the emptiness of the house. Maybe it was because I had nothing left to fight for. I'd spent so much time focused on destroying her that I hadn't thought about what would happen after the dust settled. My anger had driven me, but now that it was all over, I felt hollow. I couldn't stay in that city anymore. Every street, every restaurant, every corner reminded me of her, of us, of everything I'd lost. Even though I was the one who chose to burn it all down, there were too many memories. Some good, some bad, but all of them tainted by what had happened. No, I had to leave. I had to start fresh somewhere new. So I did. I packed what I needed, sold the house, and moved to another city. A fresh start, a clean slate. I told myself I could be Mark, the guy who didn't have a messy divorce or a scandal hanging over his head. It wasn't easy. It still doesn't feel real. There are days when I wake up and wonder if I went too far, if there was another way to handle things. But then I remember that damn picture. The way she looked in that cab, smiling like she had nothing to regret. And the guilt fades. Moving wasn't just about getting away from her. It was about getting away from everything. The people, the places, the life I thought I had. I had to rebuild. It's a work in progress, but I'm getting there slowly. So here I am in a new city, trying to figure out what comes next. I've got my space, my quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I don't have the weight of that betrayal hanging over me every second of the day. I'm not sure what comes next, but at least I'm not stuck in the past anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. It's been a hell of a ride. And if you've made it this far, I guess I'm curious. What would you have done in my place? Would you have gone for revenge like I did, or just walked away? Maybe I went too far. Maybe not far enough. I don't know. But I guess in the end, we all have to deal with betrayal in our own way. Anyway, that's my story. Thanks for listening. Update. It's been over 6 months now, and life has moved on, but not the way I expected. The whole process of divorce, revenge, and trying to rebuild my life, it's like running a marathon through mud. Every step forward feels heavy, and some days, it's hard to tell if I'm even making progress. The first few months after the divorce, I threw myself into work. I needed something to drown out the noise in my head, something to keep me from thinking about everything that happened. I got a new job, as I mentioned before, but the transition was tougher than I expected. I went from managing large accounts in a corporate environment to working at a smaller startup. It's less intense, but the learning curve has been steep. New faces, new responsibilities, and most of all, a new version of myself trying to figure out how to exist without the constant weight of Emily in the back of my mind. At first, I liked the change. The startup atmosphere felt freeing, especially compared to the rigid corporate world I had been stuck in for so long. I got to work more closely with clients, help shape the direction of projects, things I never really got to do in my old job. But then there would be moments, during meetings or casual conversations with colleagues, when out of nowhere, memories of Emily would flood back in. It's strange how the smallest things can send you spiraling. A song, a passing phrase someone says, and just like that, you're back in a time you've been trying to bury. I've had to excuse myself from meetings more than once to pull myself together. And it hasn't just been work. The loneliness hits me, even when I try to hide it. After the divorce, I thought I'd be ready to move on. Maybe try dating again. But I was fooling myself. I told myself it was progress, but the truth is, I'm nowhere near ready. I signed up for a couple of dating apps, tried to message a few women, even went on one date. It was a disaster. We sat there, awkwardly making small talk over coffee, but the whole time I felt like I was pretending to be someone else, someone less broken. The woman I was with was nice enough, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't stop thinking, what's the real story here? What's she hiding? The date was short, and I haven't been back on any dating app since. I've realized that the scars left by what Emily did aren't just about betrayal. They're about trust, too. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust someone the way I did before. Every time I think about being vulnerable with someone new, I remember how easily Emily slipped into someone else's bed without a second thought. The lies, the deceit. It's left a mark I'm still trying to process. And in the midst of all this, I keep hearing bits and pieces about Emily. It's unavoidable. We still have some mutual acquaintances, and every now and then, someone feels the need to update me on how she's doing. Apparently, she's struggling. She lost her job not long after the divorce was finalized, and from what I hear, she hasn't found stable work since. Her reputation in the industry has taken a hit, and everything seems to be falling apart for her. At first, I thought hearing about her downfall would bring me satisfaction. I thought it would make me feel better, imagining her losing everything just like I had. But when I heard she was living with her sister, bouncing between jobs, unable to keep her life together, I didn't feel anything. No joy, no relief, just emptiness. I think a part of me believed that ruining her life would fix mine, but that's not how it works, is it? There's no satisfaction in someone else's suffering, not when it costs you your own peace of mind. I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But when I heard about her struggles, it just felt hollow, like it didn't matter anymore. I had already won the battle, but the war I was fighting within myself wasn't over. There was one time, about 2 months ago, when I ran into one of her old friends at a bar. It was awkward, to say the least. She tried to avoid the topic at first, but after a couple of drinks, she leaned in and said, "You know, she's not doing great, Mark. She really messed up." I remember just nodding, pretending to care about what she was saying, but tuning most of it out. The details didn't matter to me anymore. Emily wasn't my problem, and I wasn't hers. But there was one thing that stuck with me. Apparently, Emily tried reaching out a few times, not directly to me, but through friends. She'd asked if anyone thought I might want to talk to get some kind of closure. Closure? After everything? That's the thing about people like her. They think they can tie things up with a neat little bow and walk away. But I've learned that some things don't get closure. Some wounds stay open, no matter how much time passes or how hard you try to move on. Despite everything, I couldn't stay in that city. It was suffocating. Every street, every restaurant, every corner reminded me of her. Of us. Of what I lost. Even though I was the one who chose to burn it all down, there were too many memories, good ones, bad ones, tainted by what had happened. No, I had to leave. I had to get away from everything. The people, the places, the life I thought I had. I needed a fresh start, so I packed up what I could, sold the house, and moved to another city. A new beginning. A clean slate. I told myself that here, I could just be Mark, the guy who didn't have a messy divorce or a scandal hanging over his head. It's been a few months now, and adjusting to life here has been slow. It's quieter, and there's a certain peace in the anonymity. No one knows me here. No one knows my story. And for the first time in a long time, that's been the best part. I can live without the weight of other people's pity or judgment. There's still a lot I haven't figured out. I'm not sure when or if I'll ever be ready to let someone else in. But for now, I'm focusing on the little things, work, building a routine, finding a way to exist without letting the past drag me down. It's not perfect. Some days I feel like I'm just going through the motions. But it's better than it was. I guess time really does help, but it's not the miracle cure everyone thinks it is. It just makes things quieter, less wrong. And that's where I am now. Still not healed, still not whole, but maybe just a little less broken than I was.